Hi, everyone. My name is Connor J. Wilson. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Pilot. We're part of the Next 2020 Next Canada cohort. And I'm here joined with Lauren and Hannah. Lauren, Hannah, do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Lauren. I'm the co-founder and CTO of a company called LifeLux. We were working on trying to make the senior experience in retirement homes more bearable, improving well-being and social isolation, especially in this time of COVID-19.
Hi, my name is Hannah, and I'm a founder of a company called Ascend Build, and we are building a platform that helps real estate developers and brokers find undervalued properties that are primed for redevelopment.
Awesome. And today we're going to be talking to everyone about how to build massively transformative businesses. Now, to start this, I want to preface this by saying none of us has actually built a massively transformative businesses, but we've been involved in them. I, for example, was the founding team member and I'm the VP of growth at another company called Nice Job. We're at about $3 million in annual recurring revenue right now. 7,000 businesses use us. We came in second place at the Vancouver, the New Ventures BC Startup Award last year. But that wasn't necessarily a massively transformative business either, because when we're talking about massively transformative businesses, we're talking about things like Tesla and Apple and Facebook and these sorts of massively scalable businesses. So what qualifies us to actually talk about this subject? The fact that we've been taught the subjects that we're going to be talking to you about today by people who have. One of them is Steve Jurvetson, who was an early investor in Elon Musk, someone we've met personally and has explained these concepts to us, and now we are conveying them to you, among a whole bunch of other people like the world's leading researcher in AI, Ajay Agrawal, who's the head of Next Canada, among many others. So let's dive in. What we're going to cover today is a bit about Next Canada. I know that's a big reason I'm sure a lot of you have joined. But then we're going to be talking about basically what a CEO does and why that's important in terms of envisioning the future, how to think about problems to actually build a massively transformative businesses, setting the vision, focus, and goals to achieve that, identifying the major technology trends to take part of, and using all that information to define an MVP, decide on your beachhead market, which is where you start in your initial growth, and how you actually measure success and find product market fit, which I'm sure is a term that many of you have heard of, but seems to not be a term that people really know how to define very well. So we're going to kind of dive into that. But to start this, we're going to talk about Next Canada, and Lauren, I think that's you.
Hannah, take it away.
Oh, Hannah's doing this? Okay.
Sure. So, as you guys all know, we graduated from Next 36, and it's one of the 3 Next Canada program. But Next Canada as a whole, their mission, as Ajay Agrawal, the founder, would say, is to help us fill out the missing Vinod Khosla problem. So Vinod Khosla was the first person ever to invest in, Google before Google ever became a thing. And in Canada, if you really think about the history of entrepreneurship and our economic growth, we never really had that one person that came to these really young 20-something people and say, hey, these are the different advice I have you that will fuel the trajectory of your business. So that's where Next Canada comes in, and we're all students from the program. They have invested in more than 600 entrepreneurs, created more than $400 million in economic impacts, and launched more than 230 ventures.
We're going to cover more about Next Canada program in sort of the panel discussion at the end. You'll have a chance to ask questions. As we go through this, we're going to kind of stop at each slide just to see if you do have questions. If you do have a question, just throw it in the chat, and Hannah and Lauren will just pass it off to me, or they'll just answer it themselves. So let's move in. So first of all, what does a CEO actually do? So I see a lot of companies being founded by some pretty sort of common threads. So you'll often get 2 engineers with an idea and they'll build it. And then there's confusion over who should be like the CEO. And they're not really sure what that means. Or sometimes we'll have 2 business people who start a business and need to find a technical co-founder. And then they're not sure who should be CEO. Sometimes the solo founder who's building something and is really good at one specific sort of thing, like they're really good at marketing, or really good at product, or really good at whatever. And they're not sure necessarily if that should mean that they be CEO, because a CEO is a very specific and important role. The role of a CEO is to set the vision and to drive the culture. So your job as a CEO is to define essentially what the future looks like, to rally people around that, and to drive them towards that goal and to keep them motivated and excited about it. Now, in a startup, often that involves defining the business model. How are you going to make money? Now, you see some companies like Facebook hiring like a head of commercial to commercialize the actual service itself. But by and large, CEOs are responsible for finding the business model, particularly when sort of the ideal sort of co-founder setup is typically a CEO and a CTO or some sort of technical person, whether if it's maybe it's a chief medical officer or something if you're a health startup or whatever. But it's define the business model. And through defining the vision and the culture, you then need to set goals and objectives. And we're going to get into sort of what that means on a more functional level in a little bit here. But there's also defining business strategy, which is essentially strategy, in my opinion, is really anything that's sort of 1 year to sort of 5 years out. That's sort of your time horizon for planning on things. You can plan much longer than that, of course, and that's sort of your grander vision that you're presenting to investors. But in terms of more functional steps, it's kind of 1 year to 5 years out versus whoever's handling more implementation, which could be the CTO, is typically handling more of like the 1 week to like 1 year out sort of time horizon. This also means coming up with new ideas. It means typically leading research and development. That doesn't mean doing necessarily development, but it does mean product management, which we'll also get into. It typically means handling external relationships because, again, you're trying to rally people around your vision, which involves getting people to work for you, to invest in you, etc. So CEO is typically very involved in recruitment, often leading that. And if you're a sales-oriented business, so typically B2B, kind of $10,000 to $100,000 deals, then you're selling the big deals as well. And because you are the CEO, you need to provide a safe zone and a sounding board to your executive team. Because if you're not a CEO who proactively tries to listen to people, not just reactively listens to them, you won't actually solicit the feedback you need and people won't feel comfortable coming to you, because you have to realize as a CEO, there's an inherent power gap between you and an employee where you have to bridge that gap to make sure that they feel like this is a company where they can be candid with you. So I want to do a little exercise with everyone and maybe just like throw this in the chat. Or just write it down, whatever. I can't actually see if you're doing it in the chat, so Lauren and Hannah can maybe see. But I want you to think about the product you're building or your company or your industry or whatever it is 1 year from now. Okay? So what are some changes you foresee? How is your business going to be different? How is your product going to be different? How is your company going to be different? Got it?
You guys can type it in the chat too if you want to hear the answer. I think it will be very fun for everyone to see.
And share your industry too. We'd love to hear where people are coming from, what they're trying to start, what they're working on. It'll help fuel the discussion.
Yeah. So if you've got sort of your answer for the year, let's move on to the next point here, and we'll explain why we're doing this in a moment. 10 years. And now, how does your answer change? How do you see your industry evolving? Is your product radically different? Is your company radically different? Is your industry radically different? In the 10-year horizon, you might find yourself thinking about all the different technology trends that you might want to take advantage of, but many of them probably seem to some degree unattainable. Maybe you want to build like an AI bot, or you're building some sort of heavy machinery thing and you just don't think you'll have the resources, or technologically it's not possible, or whatever it is. In the 10-year time frame, things can seem unattainable, but think about them anyway. So think about what you'd like to see and kind of how you see it realistically unfolding. And once you got it, we're going to move on. So I'll give it 3, 2, 1. 50 years. How will your industry look in 50 years? That's a long time. That's hard to predict. But you're going to try anyway. So give it some thought. What would your company look like in 50 years if it was still around? What are some things that you think might exist? And now we're going to go to the final one. And this is interesting. So anything that you think is unrealistic or unattainable or whatever, 500 years. What does your company, your industry, or your product look like in 500 years? The reason we do 500 years is because anything that seems ridiculous to have now seems ridiculous not to have in 500 years. And so I'm going to explain this with an example in a second. But do we have any answers in the chat there? I can't see. It's okay if we don't, but Hannah, Lauren. Can't hear you if you're talking, but I'm going to move on anyways. First principles thinking. SpaceX. Elon Musk envisioned space travel 500 years from now. And when you envision space travel 500 years from now, humans being a multiplanetary species, it seems ridiculous to think that we wouldn't be able to do that by then. And so the point of this exercise is when you think 500 years into the future, things that seem ridiculous now seem ridiculous that they wouldn't be able to be accomplished by then. And so you can then use first principles thinking, this idea of breaking things down into their core components, which I'll explain in a second, to actually figure out how you can shorten that time horizon down to a much more reasonable one in either your lifetime or in something that is otherwise a sliver of what it will be, but still technically attainable. So let me explain first principles thinking, and I'll explain how this was used to break down that 500-year vision into a shorter time frame. So first principles thinking is essentially the idea that you shouldn't reason by analogy and not have tunnel vision around your thinking. So not focusing on the solution, but rather focusing on the problem. So in the context of SpaceX, Elon Musk thought to himself, okay, multiplanetary species, that makes sense 500 years from now. Why can't we do today? Well, the problem is rockets are too expensive. Okay, we need a lot of rockets to get ourselves to Mars. We need them to be, reusable. We need to be able to make them bigger, et cetera, et cetera. We need to be able to actually fly people. It needs to go faster, et cetera. Now, the problem with that thinking is if you reason by analogy, you would say, well, we can't do that because rockets just are too expensive. That's how they're made. They take too much time and energy and money to build. Like we will never be able to do it. That's why 500 years from now, maybe it could happen, but it can't happen now. But by reasoning with first principles thinking, you essentially identify and question those assumptions. So the assumption he made was, rockets are expensive. Okay, why? So as it turns out, the reason rockets are expensive is because of the manufacturing cost to go into it. The raw components are, in comparison, proportionally far less expensive. And so that is when you can think innovatively about the problem and think, okay, can we improve the manufacturing process? Can we make rockets reusable? Can we do all these specific, more functional level innovations that would drive the cost of rockets down and therefore make multiplanetary travel possible? And so that's what they did. They identified and questioned their assumptions. They broke the problems down to core components and analyzed them on an atomic level, and they focused on the problem, not the solution. This is what you need to do with your industry. So whatever vision you had thought of for that 500 years from now, think about what are the actual roadblocks and bottlenecks to getting there, identify the assumptions that play into that, and think to yourself, what needs to be true for this to work in some capacity? If you're building like a super AI sort of thing, the issue might be data, right? We have the technology for like voice to speech and all these, or text to speech and all these other things. A lot of the time it comes down to data. And so that's just one example, but there's many more which we can get into later. Before we advance, does anyone have any questions here?
Seeing anything in the chat, feel free to post questions throughout or any commentary. We want to make this interactive with all participants. So feel free to message.
I can't see if anyone is talking, so please post questions. I would love to answer them for you. So now that we have our grand vision to make humans a multiplanetary species, we can sell it. So as a founder, that's your job. Your job is to sell the vision, particularly if you're the CEO. People rally around socially impactful, grandiose visions. They're exciting. And because they're exciting, this is sort of the benefit of doing this exercise. If you can build this grandiose vision, which may or may not be eventually accomplished, especially if it's on over a very long-term horizon. But the point is, if you have an actual tangible plan to get there, you can hire and train staff easier, you can fundraise easier, you can sell easier, you're going to stay more motivated yourself because you're actually making a meaningful contribution impact on society. Far more easy to have meaning in your work when you do that. You can more likely than otherwise disrupt an industry. You'll have better sales, better cost structures, assuming you can actually, do some of this innovation. And you'll really save time because you're going to focus on what actually matters. And that's where this goal setting comes in, which we'll get to. And all this really plays into building a business that'll last. And so that's called a big, hairy, audacious goal, to have this like super massively transformative business, which is why we sort of titled our talk today the way we did. So one framework to sort of help you think about whether or not the impact you're making actually is something people care about is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You might have heard of this before. If you took any like entry-level psych class or marketing class, you almost certainly did. But essentially, this is the idea that humans have fundamental needs that must be met, and needs cannot be met on the higher level until the lower level need is met. But once the lower level need is met, the marginal benefit to an individual to get more of those things is marginally decreased. Like food, for example, food has a lot of value to you if you're hungry. It doesn't have a lot of value to you if you're not hungry. Once you're not hungry, you care a lot more about being with friends than being hangry, for example. So where SpaceX touches on this is making humans a multiplanetary species is ultimately just important for our survival as a species. As global warming and things like that get worse on Earth, there is a very real risk that in the future our planet will become inhospitable. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but theoretically it could. And so making us a multiplanetary species really just improves the longevity of our species, which therefore kind of tackles these physiological and safety needs. But at the same time, space travel is travel. It's exploring a new frontier. It's doing something new, which people, if you ask people if money wasn't a question, how do you spend the rest of your life? 95% of people say they want to travel. And so SpaceX really sort of touches on these too. And so that's why SpaceX is such an exciting company to so many people. It's important and it's exciting. It doesn't really touch on the love and belonging, sure, but building a society maybe does. And so if you can think about your product and think about where it touches in this, like if you're a med tech company, you're probably more on the physiological. Just figure out how you play into this and play up those benefits to people and talk about how that's what you're actually doing. Like if you're a window cleaning company, for example, and you're cleaning people's homes, what you're really doing is you're giving them pride in their homes. That's what you're really selling. And so really identify what it is that your vision is providing, what is actually contributing. Some other sort of areas for social impact that I think are just make it easy to sort of conceptualize how you actually do that would be sort of this little framework I have here. So education, health, finance, commerce, cities and transport, food, drink, and socialization, and governance and security. So you don't typically think of, for example, a bank as a socially impactful business. And most of the time I would say that's generally true. But when I mean socially impactful, I'm talking about providing a net benefit to society. So that's essentially effort in versus effort out is a net benefit to society. And so how you sort of quantify that a little bit is think about, so let's use the bank example again. If you create some innovative new bank, some really cool thing, and people start moving their money from an old bank to your new bank, but otherwise there's no real other value created, it's just maybe better marketing or whatever it is. What you're really doing is just simply shuffling money around in the economy from someone else's pocket into yours. So that doesn't actually create any meaningful change. And so it's going to be harder for you to rally people around what it is you're actually doing. Social impact is profitable. Now, a better example is Kiva on here. So Kiva is a microfinance company. What they do is you can give what's called a microloan to someone in a developing country. You can give them like $100 to, I don't know, buy some goats and make a little farm or whatever, and then they pay it back. And this is definitely a socially impactful like finance and commerce company because they actually help people bring themselves out of poverty. And so think about ultimately how your product or service contributes to society. And that should be incorporated into your vision. If you can make it socially impactful through this way, you can do that. And so I've included some just general examples on here. You won't agree with all of them. Not all of them are necessarily like for example, food, drink, and socialization, I could have put Tinder on here because it enables people to, to meet people, but you could also argue that it makes people more precarious. So you have to think about what are called externalities as well, which is what are the, the adverse side effects of whatever it is you're building. So think about that too. So you've got your vision, you've, got your goals, you've got your social impact. Now you need to figure out how to actually achieve that. And that's where what's called your key KPI comes in. Your key KPI is the one single thing that your entire company optimizes around. Literally everything you do in your business optimizes around this one thing. And so this will affect every product decision, every hire, every feature, literally everything. And so the reason you do this is because you need to rally your team around a central goal. It creates a sense of camaraderie, it focuses production, it makes people way more productive. And as you're at the early stage of your company, that focus is different than later stage. So early stage, typically it's product performance or service performance, right? How do we maximize the value we're creating? So if it's a product like Lemonade AI, which is an insurance company, which I'll explain in a minute, their key KPI is number of policies per employee, because they don't actually use employees to do insurance policies. They use their AI algorithm and they want to make that as efficient as possible. And I'll show you that in a moment. Later stage, it's probably to do more with sales. Like, how do we turn this into a real business? How do we get real revenue from people? Once the tech reaches the right level of performance, then you should move to this monetization strategy here. But that's not the focus initially, especially if you're a consumer-facing business or software. So this is the Lemonade example. Lemonade is a AI insurance company. I'm not going to go into the entire sort of background on their business, but I will give you a high level. Their mission is to transform insurance from a necessary evil into a social good. So the way they do that is you go to their website, you buy home or now pet insurance. Costs you like, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks. It's way cheaper than anyone else because they use an artificial intelligence prediction model to predict your risk profile. You get it in like 2 minutes, and the money you pay for that goes into a pool. And in that pool, Lemonade takes 25%. That's their profit. They take that no matter what, as opposed to another insurance company, which would take all of it and then just pay out claims. And then the remaining 75% essentially go into a bucket where that money then gets given to charity if it doesn't get claimed out, essentially. And so the idea here, and it's working pretty well for them because they just IPO'd for a lot of money, is that people will be less likely to make fraudulent claims if they would be defrauding essentially nonprofits. And so this is sort of the thesis they've been on, but the real magic here is their prediction. So Lemonade is twice as efficient as State Farm with a lot fewer employees. And so this is really relevant. This is sort of equivalent to like Netflix versus Blockbuster in the early days. Like, it is crazy how efficient they are. And check out their SEC filing because they're an awesome business. Some more examples. Facebook initially had friend invitations per user as their key KPI. Snapchat was photos sent per user. Airbnb was bookings made per user, which is a little more revenue focused, but generally true. And so the reason this is all relevant is because Facebook identified that if they could get people to send a few friend invites, they wouldn't leave the platform, they wouldn't churn. And so it's really important. Lemonade's is the prediction accuracy and the number of predictions, because when they make a mistake, when they predict something wrong, it costs a lot of money because they have to pay out a claim. And so all this really boils down to is focus and persistence, which is pretty much the single most important factor for success. A lot of you right now might have different ideas you're working on. You might be in a business that has several products or does several services. It's hard to do a lot of things really well. And to do things well, you often pretty much just have to focus on doing those things. So focus on doing like one, maybe two things well if you're a little more developed. You really got to just do that and keep it simple. The best businesses like Lemonade are those that just focus on doing one thing really, really well. And that's why you do a key KPI to measure that. So define what that thing is. Lauren, I think this is your slide.
Yeah, so when thinking about what you want to achieve, and going back to that thought experiment we did at the beginning of thinking through 1, 10, 50, 500 years, there are going to be some key technologies, some that we know about now, some that you don't even foresee in the future that will really not only change your industry, but the all industries. And it's important to look out for these because while it may not seem relevant to your particular venture to begin with, you can really play around and get creative with how you can leverage these technologies. And in history, like it's always kind of been one transformational technology at a time. You think the printing press, you think the steam engine, and unlike throughout history, with this unique time where we have various tech megatrends all happening in parallel. And I love this analogy that one of our lecturers gave us while at Next. If you think of technological innovation or transformational change as ripples in a pond, it's always kind of been one at a time and you wait for it to dissipate. But right now we're at this time when there's multiple ripples, and if you can target those areas where ripples are overlapping and technology are coming together, and at those intersection points you can create something really great. And so from our experience and the experts that we've heard from, and also based on our own opinion here, some that we think you should look out for and keep in mind within your own industries. The first one being artificial intelligence. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before, but we think it's important to put it out there because it truly will change all industries and how we work and our day-to-day lives. I think it's been said that it will be the next industrial revolution. So let's go on to the next ones where genomics. We have now the ability to edit and change genes. CRISPR technology is incredible. Like, how can we, with DNA sequencing and gene editing technologies, how can we create healthcare that's like personalized? How does that change our everyday life? How will healthcare, how will everything change down the road? Couple that with AI, and you have a whole new healthcare system. Another one, wearable technologies. Instead of looking at screens and us having to revolve around technology, maybe technology will be on and with us all the time, or be a more seamless interaction with an incredible user experience. Spatial computing, you see AR and VR, but what if we have like secondary lives even within these other realms, or being able to live out different scenarios through these technologies, or create new things through this new enabled spatial computing. And finally, quantum computing. We're really on the cusp of being able to put this into practice, but there's a lot of research going on in how this will change the way in which computing works as a whole. So just a couple to think about, and also be on the lookout for other ones. What are some technologies that you guys don't see on this list and may think that will revolutionize how we all proceed forward?
That I think is really important to note on this is you don't have to be an expert in AI or genomics or wearables or spatial or computing to build a company that does any of these things. A little more hard tech things that are maybe a bit more challenging. But what you really need to do is you need to understand what is possible. So you can research all these technologies and learn about what they enable. And at the end of the day, one of the best, sort of lessons on technology we got from Ajay Agrawal in Next Canada is that technology, it's really just cost savings. At the end of the day, it's cost savings. Like the wheel reduces the cost of getting from point A to point B. That's what the wheel technology is. The internet reduces the cost of distributing and accessing information. All of these things reduce the cost of things as well. AI reduces the cost of prediction. We know that when you reduce the cost of something, demand for it and its complements go up. At the same time,
we've lost Connor. Okay.
I think then we can open the floor for discussion of it. If you have like literally any comments, any questions at all about whatever Connor has talked about, or even just about us in general or Next in general, feel free to just drop them in the chat and we're happy to take them on since this is the perfect time.
Okay. In the meantime, oh, never mind. I was going to start sharing my screen. Okay.
Yeah. All right. I'll jump back in. When did I cut out?
About a minute ago.
Okay, cool. I'll just share my screen again and we'll do that again. Okay.
How do you participate next?
Yeah, please cut me off if I already said this, Lauren or Hannah. But what I was trying to say is that it's really important to note that you don't actually have to be an expert on any of these technologies to apply it in your businesses. What you do have to know is their possibilities. So one of the ways that technology was put to us by Ajay Agrawal, who's pretty much the world leader in AI, is technology at the end of the day is cost savings or cost reduction. The wheel, which is like the OG basically technology, that reduced the cost of getting from point A to point B or moving often heavy objects. The internet reduced the cost of accessing and distributing information. AI reduces the cost of prediction. And we know just based on supply and demand theory that when you reduce the cost of something, like for example, when you reduce the cost of electricity, people all of a sudden can use light a lot more. So when you reduce the cost of prediction, you increase the demand for it and all of its complements, which are things like decision making and judgment and the actions and the data itself. You increase the value of data when you can do more with it. And so think about what sort of cost savings do any of these technologies do? How will that affect your industry? And understand that those impacts are how you can incorporate it into your business. And once you know sort of the vision and what's going to happen, then that's a vision you can convey to someone a little more technical if you're not that person, because often where the technical people fall short is on sort of the market development side, knowing how to commercialize a technology. And so if you're not technical, you need to sort of just really understand these things deeply and learn what they're capable of without necessarily being the person who's going to code it yourself. So ultimately, what you got to do once you have your vision, you have everything, you're starting your business, or maybe you already have one right now, but this is just a useful framework for thinking about this, is you need to start with an MVP. Anything you build in your company can follow this sort of methodology, whether it's a new product or maybe working on an existing product and building sort of a new feature. You can build an MVP version of that feature to test it. And so this is sort of a pyramid that shows what a feature, or rather what a product needs to do. It needs to be functional and solve some sort of problem. It needs to be reliable and actually work. It needs to be usable, in other words, like easy to use. It needs to be delightful. It needs to be enjoyable to use. So that's why good design and UI is important. An MVP is not just the bare bones functionality. It's not a sliver of that. It's a sliver of the entire pyramid. It needs to be reliable, usable, and delightful, even if it's not the entire representation of your whole vision for that thing. Oftentimes people think an MVP is just the bare bones must-haves. It's not going to be nice. It's not going to work well, whatever. That's actually not true. That's not a good representation of the actual thing. And so your MVP is essentially a prototype being a representation of the final version of something, just a bit of a higher fidelity one typically. But you can test with lower fidelity things as well. Fidelity meaning degree of detail. So when you're building anything, there's really sort of two parts to it. There's discovery and prototyping. Discovery is identifying what benefits and solutions are important to people. And one framework to decide this is called the jobs to be done framework. So what you pretty much do is you ask people about benefits that you think are important to them. How important is this thing to you? So on a sort of 1 to 5 scale, so not important at all up to, very important. And then you ask them about satisfaction, about how their needs are currently being met based on the solution of which they're currently using. So that's a 1 to 7 scale. It's, not satisfied at all the way up to, completely satisfied. And so the reason you ask this is because you're looking for things that are very important to people, as you see here, but are low in satisfaction. Those are called underserved needs, probably a term you've heard before. And this is really important. And so let me use an example to show how this could have been used by Uber. So if Uber had asked people, how important is getting from point A to point B? Because that's essentially what Uber does. Well, people are going to obviously say very important, right? And now the next part of this, the satisfaction, context and specificity is really important here, because if Uber had asked, well, how satisfied are you with your current methods of transportation? They might have given like a middle of the road or like high leaning answer, like, oh yeah, I mean, I can get where I'm going, I can drive, I can walk, whatever, right? But if they had asked people, how satisfied are you with taxis? People would have said, I hate taxis. And then all of a sudden, you have a high importance, low satisfaction segments of the market with real needs that need to be met. And then you can dive into, okay, well, why are you not satisfied with taxis? What's wrong with them? And so one of the things that's wrong with taxis is, people didn't like waiting and knowing if their taxi would ever come. And so Uber couldn't actually solve that problem. They couldn't solve cars getting there faster. I mean, maybe a little bit with their on-demand, ordering, but what they could do is they could show you where the taxi is on its way to you, which makes it feel like, it doesn't take as long because you can see it on its way. And so this is actually really important. So identify the opportunity scores for things, which is the importance plus the maximum of importance minus satisfaction, or 0, and that's just so that you don't have a negative score, basically. So more important things are more important. Once you identify, what benefits and features you're going to build, and I actually think I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'm going to skip the next slide. That's discovery. So discovery is these things. It's identifying the thing. I'll come back to this in a second. You then need to define and come up with ideas for features for those things, right? So ultimately, features can be broken down into 1 of 3 categories. There's must-haves, so the things your app absolutely needs to have. If you are a search engine, for example, like Google, you must be able to search for things. That's a pretty standard thing. But a delighter, which is the thing that makes that experience better but isn't required for it to actually occur, might be the I'm feeling lucky feature, right? I don't even think they have this anymore. They got rid of it, but or maybe they didn't. But it was a kind of fun feature. Another like delighter feature would be if you click search, you get a satisfying like ding or something like that. I don't think they did this either, but like that could be an example of a delighter. Performance is things like speed. Does it load quickly? How relevant are the search results? Things like that. So the point here is you need to have your must-haves, but that doesn't actually make a good, app, product, service, whatever. More performance is better, but there's, decreasing, returns there. And the delighter things are what actually make it better. And so part of what made Google so delightful is how simple it was relative to search engines, other search engines at the time. That and their search results were much better. So what you do is you identify the benefits you're trying to hit. You then brainstorm on all possible features that could actually provide those benefits. And then you prototype. Now, prototyping can kind of fall into 1 of 2 things, product tests or market tests. You don't have to actually code an app to see if people want it, for example. What you could do instead is run a marketing test. You could create a landing page, so just a page on a website with a early access sign up email capture thing, run some ads to your target audience and see if anyone signs up. That could be some validation that people are interested. Now, any data is good, but data without comparison is much less valuable. So always run multiple tests at once, A/B test things, and see comparatively, do more people sign up for this than that? So that's if people actually want the thing you're building. So that's probably step number 1. Step number 2 is, can we build it, and can we build it in a way that they want it? So wireframes are a good example of this. A wireframe is just, you can literally think of it as just boxes and elements laid out on a page that ideally are clickable, and then you can show it to people and see if it's usable and see if they like it and ask their feedback on it. And they're less afraid of giving you that feedback when it's low fidelity, when it's low detail, because they don't want to, they're not afraid of hurting your feelings. And once you have all the features you want to build and you're relatively confident, and then you can use this RICE score here. So RICE is a product management framework for prioritizing product features. And there's 4 components to it. There's reach, impact, confidence, and effort. Impact, which I'll start with, is essentially just the magnitude of value to the people who use it. Reach is the percentage of your target audience who actually would use it. And confidence is how confident you are in those answers. And then effort is typically something like number of developer weeks to build, or days or hours, or really however you want to define it, but you just keep that consistent across your features. And so what this allows you to do is identify high impact, high reach, high confidence. And so confidence is just how confident you are in the actual answer in your research. High reach, high impact, high confidence things divided by the effort, which shows you what are the easiest and most impactful things to build right now. You can also sort of throw in other things, like I like to throw in like competitive uniqueness, and if it helps reduce churn and stickiness and virality and things like that. But this is a good sort of framework for prioritizing that. And so once you've got all your priorities here, like these are you've done this with the RICE score. You've got the features that touch on this benefit, the features that touch on this one, this one, this one, this one. You've got your big list here. To define your MVP, you typically pick usually all your must-haves, or at least for like the 1 or 2 benefits you focus on in your MVP. Often kind of 1 performance benefit and 1 delighter benefit. And this comes back to this sliver right here. This allows you to do that. And so the reason you do this, the reason you start with an MVP, is because you are trying to validate that what you're building is something that has product market. We'll touch on in a little bit. But you're also using it to find your beachhead market. So a beachhead, in sort of military terms, is like in D-Day, it's the beach landing where they stormed the beach and they attacked the Germans. They did all the things. Well, in market development, it's sort of similar. Your product is trying to break into the market. You're trying to get customers, and you're trying to sort of win the battle for their business. And so you need the first group of people you target, which is your first segment, and you need 1 application that they find valuable. The way you then build off of that is you, for the same segment of people, build more applications. You build more things that you can sell to them or that provide value to them. And you look for additional segments who could benefit from your existing solutions. So you start with segment 1, application 1, segment 1, application 2, segment 1, application 3. But as you do that, you look for more groups of people who would benefit. And so it kind of filters out from here. You see this really well in Google. They started with sort of a general group of people who wanted, their search engine, and they built more other things like Google Maps, Google Flights, Google, etc., serving a similar audience, but also serving new ones. Lauren, do you want to touch on pirate metrics?
They're fun ones. They're called pirate metrics because it literally spells out R. And so that's easy to remember. It basically is almost like a funnel of how you really want to get customers, and allows you to get specific about each stage, because everyone wants to get customers and users onto their platform, but breaking it down into these key 5 components really helps to analyze what aspects of your product lend itself to one or the other. So the first thing, you start with acquisition. You need to get users onto your product, platform, whatever it may be. And this includes usually like marketing or any sort of way of getting them on, or just attractive features. What will drive them to even download, buy, or get to your product? The next is activation. You can have as many people, whether it's an online platform, like using it, but they may not actually be engaging. Like, are they really a valuable part of your network? And getting users to really engage, like how many times are they using your app? How many times are they engaging in your product? Are they actually using it? That's a key aspect that will drive a really loyal customer base. Retention is whether they stay. If you have millions of downloads a month, but then people are deleting it, that doesn't really matter in the end, because you're spending all this time and effort to try to get them on. Retention is such a key aspect because you don't want them to just funnel out the other end. The next level is revenue. So revenue comes down at this level because you really aren't able to monetize or capitalize something without that initial user base. You have to have the users before you can generate revenue from them. And this allows you to really working with that, bowling pin model of figuring out which features allow you to, that apply to your first beachhead market, and which ones actually get them so excited about what you're making that they want to pay for it. So this is really key. And then finally, referral. So you have users on your platform, but how many are actually then sharing it with others? So whether that be like Facebook, sending friend requests, whether that be any sort of network effect, if you have strong network effects and they're able to capitalize on it, then you'll be able to create organic growth and not spend as much money on your marketing, which is so key. And so a lot of companies within this have been trying, and we've focused on trying to get some sort of network effect so that once I'm on it, it's more valuable if I have 5 other friends on it, or if I have 5 other colleagues on that network with me. So those are the 5 key metrics for Pirate Metrics.
Yeah, and it's really good for these metrics to identify an assumption for each one that you try and then validate through prototyping and testing and innovation. So we talked about product market fit. So what the heck does that even mean? So this is a number of things that sort of indicate product market fit. If you have all of them, you have
Connor, your mic's acting weird. I can sort of hear you, but it's a little faint and fuzzy.
Can you hear me now?
Not really.
How about now?
Here, I can continue from where you left off, but what is product market fit? We're talking about product market fit here, and a key aspect to that is like product market fit is often about leading on to like talking about the users. It's about getting product people fit. And Connor, you're back.
Yes.
And so there you go. You can continue on.
All right, yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. So I don't know if I missed what Lauren you were saying there, but
product people fit.
Okay, good, perfect.
Go on from there.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, there's a number of tests you can sort of do to validate if you have product market fit, and this is typically what you need to raise like a Series A round, for example. This is what investors want to see. So it's important to note that what we're showing here is directly relevant to essentially investability. I don't even know if that's a word, but I just made it up if it wasn't. And so there's several things. So the 40% test is one of them. If your product disappeared today, would 40% of your users be very disappointed that it disappeared? So this is something that you could survey. NPS is another one. That's Net Promoter Score. That's the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors. And so it's a 1 to 10 scale survey essentially, and you take the percentage of people who rate you a 9 out of 10 on would you recommend this product? That's the question to other people, and you subtract that from, I believe it's either, I think it's six and below, and so if it's 20 or above, you have a good NPS score, and that's where you kind of need to be. The product usage itself needs to be growing, and so this is a little framework by Greylock, one of the largest venture capital firms out there. As you build your product, you're trying to move up this hierarchy. You need to get users completing the core action, which is the sort of one thing you want users to do on your platform. For Facebook, it was sending friend invitations. The product should get better the more it's used, so building sort of these network effects. They create virtuous loops. So in Facebook's case, as they post things, they themselves get more value out of it because their friends do as well. And then at the end there, you get sort of this massively transformative multi-billion dollar company. Churn, so the percentage of people who stop using your service every year should be sub 30%. So you can take your monthly churn and annualize it. You don't actually need a year's worth of data. Your monthly recurring revenue, MRR, should be ideally growing 10% month over month. Again, this is what investors are looking for. If you are a sales-driven model, typically B2B, you need to have relatively short sales cycles, or at least short relative to the sales value itself. And your sales team needs to be hitting their quota. You need to be hitting your goals. And so ultimately, this is still what you need to be showing. So maybe you grow 30% in 1 month and you don't grow again until you grow 40% a few months later. But overall, like averaging out, you should have at least 10% month over month. And what all this really comes down to, what your churn and your NPS and all this stuff, it really gets boiled down to these two things here, which is lifetime value, the total value of all revenue a customer will give you over the lifetime of doing business with you, less the cost to provide the service, over the cost to acquire a customer, the CAC, the customer acquisition cost. And so basically what this means is for every dollar you spend, you need to be getting at least $3 back in lifetime value. That doesn't have to come right away, but you need to be able to show that there's lifetime value there. And so that should be at least 3 to 1. The best businesses do 3 to 1. Typically a lot more in many cases, but that's sort of the threshold. And this is sort of another framework to sort of look at it. So it's really recapping sort of what we've talked about. You need to identify a target customer and your target user. You need to do customer discovery to identify their underserved needs. The value proposition your business provides, which is the benefits your product features offer, need to directly address those underserved needs. The features need to provide the value, and the user experience for those features needs to be pleasant, usable, reliable, etc. And you constantly test and iterate this. This is what sort of the lean startup model touches on. Please read that book if you haven't. And it's all about iterating on the product. And again, this is valuable whether or not you're starting a business or you already have one, or you're building out your product management team or whatever it is. Focus on hitting these things by doing this essentially and through constant iteration. I think that's it. So thank you everyone so much. That's our presentation. We're now going to open up the floor to sort of a general discussion period. So please throw in your questions. We have about 10, 12 minutes left, but if there's a lot of questions, we can extend it. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. I'm seeing some questions in the chat specifically about Next, the program and applications. There are 3 streams now within Next Canada. So it did start out as Next 36, and that was really, I guess, the beachhead program if we're talking about the words we were using today. And Next 36 is typically for new grads. You can come in with or without an existing idea, and some even come in with an established product. And that one is really like getting started and providing all the mentorship and networking for creating for some it's their first startup. For others, they've been entrepreneurs in other aspects. And then a second program is called Next AI. It really focuses on companies where the core competency is artificial intelligence and products that really activate and capitalize on the key aspects that artificial intelligence can enable. And then finally, Next Founders, which are for more developed and established startups, usually in sales and revenue stage. So if one of those speaks to you, yeah, be sure to apply. We are all from Next 36, as we mentioned, and those applications are actually open already. So be sure check out the link that Liza Klemenko sent in the chat, and yeah, you can check it out.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions? Or oh, there you go. Paul Tan, is Next AI an East Side only? Next AI is Canada wide, is it not?
They're all Canada wide.
Yeah. Everything's Canada wide, yeah.
Yeah. Next is based out of Toronto, but I mean, even this summer, we've all done our courses and lectures remotely. And I mean, who's to say how it will turn out next year? But what happened in years past was that everyone was, at least from Next 36, was all within a single residence building, actually at the University of Toronto. And so you could like feed off of everyone's energy. And but this year, with the flexibility of remote work, in some ways you're able to like focus more time on building your venture and then attending lectures online. So it's just different, but anyone across Canada can apply to any of those 3 programs.
Yeah, it's actually been really great, honestly, particularly if you have another job that you're doing as well. So I'm running 2 startups right now, which literally would not have been possible had I had to go to Toronto. So it actually worked out for the best.
Yeah.
Do we have other questions? Because if not, we're pretty much at time here, but I might just start picking on people and asking some questions to the chat there. Paul Tan, what are you working on? I'll throw it in the chat, maybe. This doesn't work quite as well when it's over virtual. You can't see anyone on Zoom.
I don't know if participants, I think you can actually activate your audio. Maybe.
Yeah, if anyone wants to just join, okay, Scope Media AI, very cool. Andrew, hello, hey. Andrew works with me at Pilot.
Oh, nice.
Awesome. Was wondering what you guys experienced with achieving market fit. Was it frustrating? So Andrew knows full well that we're currently in that process right now. We're building our alpha. Pilot is a social trip planner that we're working on. It makes it easy for anyone to plan group trips together. We identified that there was sort of a gap in the market for something like that. So we're building the alpha right now. It's sort of like Asana for travel, if you've ever used Asana before. And we'll find out if it has product market fit once we release the alpha. So yeah, we'll see. Hannah,
Hannah.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure where you guys see the questions. I'm a bit lost.
Chat's on the right-hand side.
On the right-hand side, there's chat polls, people. We're in chat.
Okay, anyways, I was just going to add on Connor's point on how when I started building out Zen, a lot of it was like there are a lot of like quantitative metrics you can use. So for example, how many users join per week. But when you're just starting out with an idea and you're reiterating or doing prototypes and designs, you don't actually have those numbers ready. You have prospects and not users. So in those situations, how do you actually figure out whether something you're building is actually meaningful, right? And I think that the younger you are, the more likely you are to have false positives. And this is something we learn at Next as well, which is when you do interview with people, everyone loves you because you're passionate when you're young. And then when you say something, everyone's like, wow, that's so interesting. But when you actually launch it, nobody really cares about it. So you have to really listen to the signs to avoid these false positives. So, hey, this is interesting is actually a negative. And hey, can I buy this right now? Can I get this right now? That's a positive. So really listening and I guess being honest with yourself is a very important component when you start out.
Explain the mom test, Hannah.
Yeah, so essentially the mom test is this book you can Google online. There are a lot of good summaries you can read online, but essentially it's a way for you to interview with people. So imagine your mom is your customer. If you go talk to your mom about, hey mom, I could bake this thing. Well, your mom is your mom, so she loves you and she will always compliment you. So asking those questions like, is this useful? Do you like this? Aren't actually meaningful or insightful to whether something you're grading is what people want. But asking questions like, Mom, how often do you eat this per week? What is the cost that you usually buy? Like those more reflexive questions allow you to gain actual insights as opposed to, I guess, sentimental answers from people that like you.
So I saw Lauren just threw the mom test book into the chat there. I just threw another one. It's called the Lean Product Playbook. Probably the best book I've ever read on product development, and I encourage anyone who's ever building a product ever to read it. It's kind of like the Lean Startup book, which I'm sure you're also familiar with. It's very famous, but this is just a much more functional, specific, like here's how you actually do it sort of book, and it's really good. We got a question from Adil. Are Next Canada's advisors generally open to engage with new founders who are not going? So I think the alumni are, like, we have brand ambassadors who are willing to talk to you, but one of the benefits of actually being in the program is access to the advisors. The advisors are typically people who are very senior people, like, for example, Ajay Agrawal. He, was one of the founders of the Creative Destruction Lab. He, teaches us. Probably not willing to talk to you unless you're in Next, but he would probably respond to like an email. I would assume, if you're lucky. I'm advised, like my business right now, we have a former bank CEO as an advisor, the guy who led Snap Travel to about $100 million in gross market value, or what is it, gross transaction value, and an SVP product at a large financial firm. And so these are people that we've gotten through the program itself. And so there's a lot of value just in that. Like, honestly, like if we hadn't done Next Canada, the value we would have gotten out from our business and like where we are now, like we just simply wouldn't be. It's been hugely valuable in terms of validating things and having these incredibly talented, intelligent people who have been through it, just being able to bounce ideas off them. It's just a factor of like making fewer mistakes, which plays dividends in your growth because you can avoid them by asking people.
I think there are like 3 key pillars to what we got out of Next, and I think Hannah and Connor, you'd agree. The first you mentioned are the advisors. The second, like we do have a lot of lectures, especially through that 4-month summer period, where, I mean, personally, as someone coming from a tech background, learning a lot about investing, marketing, product market fit, what was the other one? In terms of like entrepreneurial finance and the sheets. I still don't do much of it. The term sheets, I still don't do much of it, but it's really important stuff to know, because if you aren't aware of these things going into it, you can kind of be caught off guard and really do things that aren't benefiting the company as a whole. And that's really what matters in terms of trying to gain success there. And then finally, like the cohort itself and the alumni. I think there's been over a decade of Next 36 participants throughout the program, and having those connections, and also your current cohort, because you're all going through sort of similar things at the same time, and you can all like bounce ideas off of each other, like, oh man, like product market fit is hard, user interviews are like hard for me to get the right info out of them. Like, people are trying similar things at the same time, and you have this direct cohort of people who are going through the same challenges that a lot of people who are, and your friends aren't usually going through, and your usual colleagues probably aren't going through at the same time as you.
Yeah, the friendships are huge. Yeah, I was just saying, yeah, the friendships you make are really big. There's so like, I've yet to meet a single community of people as, I guess, like aligned with me in terms of like my own entrepreneurial goals. Like, everyone you meet is incredibly passionate, ambitious, and intelligent. And they're all just super kind people too. Like, it's a very supportive environment. Like, it's not competitive. You're not competing with the other entrepreneurs. Like, you're there to help each other. We even have like a Facebook group where we'll share things. Kind of fallen off the boat a little bit in terms of doing like coffee chats, but we were doing them throughout the summer. And we should probably do that more. But yeah, no, it's been great. And if you do have any questions about, Next at all, outside of this session, feel free to like add me on LinkedIn. It doesn't actually say I'm in Next on LinkedIn, and I'm not going to get into why right now, but there's a couple reasons for that. You can message, I'm sure you can message Lauren and Hannah as well, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have. There's a couple other like brand ambassadors out there who are trying to, solicit people to apply right now. It is tough to get in, but that is also what makes it so rewarding. And so I do encourage everyone here to apply if you're not involved. If you already have a business, you can apply to the Next Founders.
Talking about the application process, there was a question earlier about that. And as we mentioned, the application is open, and there's an online form where you kind of talk about yourself, how your entrepreneurial spirit. And it's also like accompanied by a video, which is actually done through a Next alumni company called Cura Talent. But then the next the selection weekend, which is where all the finalists collect over a weekend, and it's fun, it's busy, it's intense, but it's also a really rewarding experience where like you connect and also stay connected to people who made it to the final weekend. And some people's co-founders they found through that final selection weekend. Me personally, my co-founder is actually someone I met at selection weekend. So it's a really cool experience. It's hard to describe anything like it, but yeah, that's kind of how the application process goes down.